What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Now today's video is something I'm very excited about actually because it's a video that I've actually been trying to talk about for a couple months now I think, but I just wasn't able to find or at least find enough information to actually make a video on this topic. But it turns out that Riot actually released a full-on article, so there you go, there's my information, and we're going to break it down, and I'm very excited for this, because today we're talking about champion prototypes. Now when Riot sit down and start developing champions, a lot of times the best way is kind of just to imagine like what they might be like in game, and just kind of get a working prototype created from existing parts that is just sort of, as kind of like a placeholder for playtesting and designing what that champion should look like. And you can't really just create a perfect model and skin for a new champion before you've actually decided on what the champion's gonna be at all, their personality, their abilities, or anything like that. So these prototypes actually play a very significant part, something that I think is very interesting in the actual champion design process that takes place in League of Legends. So today we wanted to show off all of the champion prototypes that we know about and just share them with you guys. And if you guys enjoy the video, hit that like button, and if you don't enjoy the video, definitely feel free to hit that dislike button, because if this video hits, let's say 5,000 ratings, I'm gonna see if maybe I can contact some of my Rider friends and make another one of these, or like a similar video in the future showing off some more prototypes. Either way, let's get started. So nailing the core concept is kind of like a bit of a required step before you can actually start working on prototypes in general. So Riot usually pulls together a team that's, usually at least maybe one artist, one writer, and a gameplay designer, of course, so that they can work together and figure out what that niche in the game the new champion's going to fill, as well as, what type of appearance and personality is going to fit that niche really well, do that gameplay fantasy the most justice. And once they've really settled on that sort of niche, what the characters going to be, the appearance stuff only has to be really simple, because you kind of get a lot of cues on how a champion should look and feel from the way their gameplay is going to work. And to quickly get a character in game to test out those ideas, Riot of course throws together one of these prototypes as kind of like a placeholder champion that they can kind of just load up with the abilities, get a better understanding of how the kit should actually work from a technical perspective, and really start hammering down those massive amounts of playtests that they actually have to do to see if the gameplay kit's going to work out, as well as of course identifying any bugs and stuff that might pop up. Now and again, these prototypes have abilities that are just amazing fits. Take Vi, for example, who started off with a prototype of Vault Breaker and kept it all the way up until her release. But a lot of the time, pretty much the entire champion kit gets swapped in and out, tested in different ways, reiterated on, or sometimes just changed completely. And it would be a huge waste of time to, of course, create new art and new models and animations for those sort of abilities that might not even last a week in playtesting. And of course, their solution is to make placeholders, kind of like we do with the ability animations in our videos almost, honestly. So essentially what they do is they just take another champion who has kind of like a similar base model or similar sort of style, I guess, maybe similar role to what the champion would be like. Then they take the spell visuals, the effects from whatever is closest to how the new abilities should look and how they should feel, and then they can make like small modifications to those older assets to turn them into like really basic and just simple prototypes for how the new champion's assets would actually work, theoretically at least. It's mostly just so that they can actually playtest the champion in the first place. And so Riot released some footage of NARS Prototype during his development that demonstrates this really well. And this is something that we actually took a look at a little bit of a while back. And you can kind of see that instead of creating a whole new model and skin for the new champion, they kind of just used a bit of concept art for the icon and then used a tiny version of Nautilus for the champion in-game actually. During this prototype, they gave him an auto attack that traveled at a similar kind of speed. In this case, it was Syndra's auto attacks. And Gnar is actually a little bit of a special one, of course, since he does have two different forms, and this was demonstrated in the prototype by in his mega form he turned into this big red Warwick, which is actually pretty clever considering the fact that of course Mega Gnar is a big monster. And it's a really cool example of how Riot uses other champion assets to make a pretty, quick and easy version of how the new champion they are working on should feel and play with, just so that they have a version that they can actually playtest with. And Riot also has a few things that they kind of have to be careful of when making these prototypes though. Since they use other champion assets, means that they could honestly easily confuse the original champion for the prototype that's being playtested. First up, they definitely have to make sure they look distinct, so they have to like change change the colors usually is what they're going to do. You know, for example, Jinx's prototype was actually an off-color ash. So as a result, it still kind of felt small and feminine with a ranged weapon, you know, which is one of Jinx's basic design points. But if you saw this weird-looking Ash walking towards you, you would know instantly that it's the new prototype and not actually Ash, and of course, then you could react accordingly if you're one of the playtesters. And the same applies to other prototypes in terms of just representing the gameplay properly. You know, if the new champion was meant to be this huge threatening tank, using someone like Alistar as sort of like the placeholder for that character is probably going to be pretty solid, because his appearance really, you know, invokes that sort of image, that mindset. You know, when you see some weird color Alistar running at you, like, you think that guy's a big beefy tank. Finally, of course, although probably a little bit less importantly actually, the prototypes definitely do need to have some of the personality of the new champion. You know, for example, if you're going to make a prototype for playtesting a version of Lulu back in the early development phases of her, you'd still want to keep it, you know, kind of silly, kind of cute maybe, and of course a prototype for someone like Braum would be someone who's like really friendly, not someone who's on like the scary looking sort of side of things. Abilities are actually a lot easier to prototype because for the most part Riot kind of just tends to build from what they know works. You know, going back to the Gnar example, Riot gave us footage of his particular prototype's abilities, and it's actually pretty similar to Gnar on release, but instead of having his own ability visual effects, he borrows from other champions to give a close enough feeling. You know, instead of a boomerang on his Q, he uses Sivir's Q, of course, since, you know, it's the boomerang blade. They're pretty similar in terms of like what the abilities actually do, something like that. For the W, he used Vayne's Silver Bolt, since of course that's one of the original 3-hit passives in the game, demonstrates it really clearly what the ability is going to do, all sorts of stuff, alongside with using kind of like a Master Yi or maybe a Blitzcrank speed boost effect, since it feels like really excited and offers that sort of like visual satisfaction once he gets that proc on the 3-hit passive. And for Gnar's little hop on his E, Riot actually used Ziggs's Satchel Charge as the base, since it kind of offers, you know, the right bounciness, that sort of like happy little personality that feels like a playful Gnar should be in his mini form. And these kind of versions are actually pretty cool for their, you know, for those prototype playtests. For the mega form of Gnar, because the prototype used Warwick as a placeholder, Riot actually had to get maybe a little bit inventive to make the animations work. To throw a boulder, they actually used the start of Warwick's death animation to actually make it look kind of reasonable. Meanwhile, Mega Gnar's jump was a lot more impactful than Mini Gnar's hop as well, so they actually swapped out the ability for a version of Tristana's rocket jump as far as the animation goes, since that had the, you know, the right amount of impact when he lands and stuff like that. Instead of using the actual sound effects from Rocket Jump though, which kind of wouldn't really make sense on sort of like this monster kind of champion, they actually used Udyr's Bear Stance Roar as the sound effect for the prototype of Mega Gnar's jump, since that's like a super bestial sound. You know, it's going to cause people in the playtest, the actual playtesters that are trying to figure out like how good the champion is, or, you know, if the champion works, it's going to make it so that the playtesters that are playing the champion associate that ability with this, you know, big monstrous threat coming towards them. And these are all abilities that actually made it onto the final version of Gnar, but Riot obviously also had to cook up prototypes for, of course, some of his old scrapped abilities, and they definitely shared some of those with us as well. And if you saw our video, which was actually a really long time ago about Gnar's development, you might have actually heard about some of these abilities before as well. So one version of Mega Gnar's W actually originally used to be an auto attack chaining effect that would stun on the first hit. So the prototype used like a Kennen stun and like a Ravenous Hydra AoE effect to symbolize all of that AoE damage, and use the animation for that ability. Gnar's original E also actually used to knock people back a little bit as well, which actually felt great on the prototype version, but it ended up being, you know, just a little bit too overpowered, honestly. He was a bit overloaded on crowd control already, so they ended up removing that displacement version out of his ability, since he was already, you know, pretty decent without it. And as for Gnar's ultimate, it was, of course, if you saw our video, you would know this, it was actually the original version of Tahm Kench's Devour. So it looked pretty cool on the prototype, actually, and kind of suggested that they were, you know, they were going to take a lot of damage while being eaten for sure. But Riot did eventually decide that it was a really awesome ability that should be core to a champion's kit, rather than just being like this kind of secondary feature. And so they removed it from Gnar, and eventually later on designed an entire champion around it, which ended up being Tahm Kench. And its placeholder abilities on prototypes like this that really help Riot come to decisions like that though. but it's placeholder abilities on prototypes like this that really help Riot come to decisions like that and just make really awesome and just accurate playtests where they can playtest the champions and learn a lot. So without prototypes like this, it's possible maybe Tahm Kench would have never existed, and Gnar also might have been a lot less fun to play, since his ultimate nowadays is just this awesome, insane playmaking ability. We've also got some other really cool sort of like proxy champion concepts that we knew about that I thought were kind of just interesting, that maybe we could try and create animations for, that you guys might like to know about. So out of the ones that we know, it turns out that Aurelia's original placeholder was Referee Katarina during development, for example, and there's also a couple of other placeholders that we found about from Riot Groovy Lord. So unfortunately with these next upcoming prototypes, we don't actually have any official footage from Riot. It's kind of just like, you know, stories from the champion designers that they kind of told us about their designing experiences with the champions. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to, of course, create animations for what these champion prototypes might have looked like. First up, we're starting with some information about Vi's champion prototypes that I thought were super cool. Originally, Vi had two different placeholders. So first up, in the beginning of her design and playtesting, she was sort of like this green Malphite sort of character. And later, after her core design had been refined, she became this like weird blue and black Iron Scale Shyvana kind of character that was used for the playtesting versions until they could develop the model for her. Next up, we're looking at some stuff from Jhin. So since he was, of course, a sniper as well, Jhin originally started out as this all-black skin from Caitlyn, except he kind of had like this glowing green rifle and eyes to make him look super distinct and give him like this, you know, a little bit more crazy of an aura almost. That kind of feel of like he's just a little bit crazier than Caitlyn appears in the first place. Next up, we're looking at some of the prototypes from Echo. So Echo actually used to shapeshift into Lucian to use ranged attacks at one point during his development, which is pretty crazy, but at least it's more evidence that Riot could totally make that shape-shifting champion one day that we're still holding out on. And Riot Groovy Lord also shared his favorite prototype with us. So during one point in Ivern's development, he had his own model and skin, but he actually didn't have any animations because they were still making them after the model was already developed. And so to compensate for the playtesting so that the playtesters could still play the champions, they gave him Jhin's animation set, which I'm sure, as you can imagine, probably just made him look super fabulous. Either way, that's just about going to wrap up everything for this video. I'm actually pretty excited to finally be able to cover this topic, and it's something that I definitely want to make a second episode of, you know, showing off some more champion prototypes in the future that we maybe didn't get to cover in this video. You know, it's a pretty clever way to get like new designs ready for testing and just a clever way to make playtestable versions of champions without needing to spend, you know, a ton of time developing stuff like art and animations for the playtesters. And it definitely helps them shape a champion and kind of just figure out, you know, where to go with stuff like their art direction, you know, personality, stuff like that. And of course, the most important part, their gameplay. Either way though, looks like that's going to be it for me. Thank you guys so much for making it all the way to the end. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop that like, or if you didn't, you know, feel free to leave a dislike and subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.